After flying just one time in 1921, at age 12, a Texas boy flew solo just 4 days after that first flight, and he flew into aviation history. Jess Dockery was born February 26, 1909 in Dallas, Texas. He was named after the famed Orville Wright, but a nurse misspelled his name and the Orval stuck. The young Dockery moved with his family to Lawton, Oklahoma, and his father operated a jitney service from Lawton to nearby Fort Sill, where the boy first learned about the Army Signal Corps aircraft, mostly Curtiss Jennies and de Havillands. By 1921, the family had moved to Corpus Christi, and a chance happening in September of that year changed his life forever. Riding his bike home from school, he noticed an airplane landing in a cow pasture near the school. Upon going over and watching the pilot, Barney Flowers, an Army pilot, working on the plane, a Hall Scott 4-cylinder Standard, the pilot told the 12-year-old he would give him a ride in the plane if he would watch it for him while he was away, and to not let the cows get near it. The boy agreed, not understanding that the pilot would be gone for 3 days. He never left the plane. His brother told his parents, who sent bologna sandwiches, and at night the boy slept on the motor and cockpit covers. When the pilot returned after the 3 days, he gave the boy a ride, taking off and landing at 4 small towns west of Corpus Christi. The young Dockery said that he'd watched and understood all the pilot was doing, and understood why and how the controls worked. After the free ride, the pilot asked the boy to watch the plane for another couple days while he was off to Houston. The young Dockery agreed, skipping school to stay with the plane. After school on the second day, this time, friends came over, and the young Dockery boasted that he could fly the plane. He coached his brother Alfred to start the prop and jump back. The plane came to life, and the young Dockery said he had only intended to taxi the plane a little distance, but the power came up fast, and he was airborne. At about 100 feet, the plane stalled, out of fuel. He circled and landed safely, much to the amazement of the schoolboys and soon the crowd of people who had gathered to see a real airplane up close. But at just age 12, Jess Dockery had his wings. The boy worked for the pilot for some time as a crewman and helper, and then served as a spotter for a plane looking for fish in the Gulf of Mexico and paid by the pilot and fishermen. The next few years, Dockery would try to find work with pilots, but the opportunities were few. In 1922, the family moved to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where the senior Dockery worked as a grocery store salesman. Nothing could stop the young Dockery's thirst for aviation, and the teenager would commute to Stuttgart, Arkansas on his motorcycle to fly for Richard Schilberg, a welder and mechanic who owned the first aircraft factory in Arkansas. On one occasion, when he was 15, he solo delivered a plane to Mississippi for Schilberg. Work was slow, and a year later, he moved to Oklahoma City to work for Burrell Tibbs Flight School, where he gave ground training. It was at this school that Dockery helped teach students Paul Braniff and Wiley Post how to fly. Both of these men went on to aviation history on their own. In the mid-20s, Dockery took up barnstorming and traveled the country doing aerobatic flying. He flew with the famous Gates Flying Circus of the 20s, as did Charles Lindbergh and Clyde Pangburn, the first man to fly solo across the Pacific. Dockery also flew with famous aviator Jimmy Doolittle, who later went on to form the famous Doolittle Raiders of World War II. And Dockery flew with Claire Chennault, among several others. Dockery recalled flying passengers on joy flights with Charles Lindbergh, one time at Lake Village, where Lindbergh flew his first night flight. Dockery is credited with helping a group of farmers and pilots in Leland, Mississippi rig a Standard J aircraft to unload bags of insecticide to pour over cotton crops in that area. It was haphazard, but was the beginning of aerial crop dusting. In the late 1920s, Dockery was the first pilot to commercially dust crops from the aircraft on the Mississippi Delta region. Dockery was part of a small group of men that actually started ag aviation and making it an essential farming tool today. A milestone came in Dockery's career when in 1926, at the urging of Charles Lindbergh, Dockery began to fly mail service. The day in January Dockery was to get his license, he gave his date of birth as 1904. To make it appear he was 21. He got the license and flew mail from St. Louis to many cities all over the middle part of the U.S. In the spring of 1927, Orville Dockery married Irene Borman of Lake Charles, Louisiana. They had 2 daughters. He was working for Mid-South Airways in Memphis at the time. Later, he worked for Clyde Cessna in Wichita, Kansas. And later in 1928, one of his old students, Paul Braniff, offered him a job at his newly formed airline in Tulsa, and Dockery became one of the first 3 pilots for Braniff Airlines, first known as Tulsa, Oklahoma City Airline. He was flying the Ryan B-1 and the Stinson Detroiter for the Braniff brothers. In 1932, tired of working for others, he decided to start a crop dusting service and made his love of the Delta his home, founding the J.O. Dockery Air Service in Clarksdale, Mississippi. He continued to spend free time and vacations barnstorming and attending air shows, and was very proud to win the All-American Trophy at Miami in 1934 and 35 for his dead duck landing skills, where the pilot stops the engine at 2,000 feet, circles down to landing with only one 360-degree turn allowed, then stops the plane on a baseball-sized spot without using brakes. His average for 3 attempts was just 9 inches from the spot. His crop dusting aircraft included Waco 9s, Travel Air 100s, and Stearman C-3Bs. About 1936, he began dusting crops in the Grand Prairie, and he noticed that Stuttgart was the scene for many innovative and progressive farming methods. He moved his operation from Mississippi to Arkansas in 1939. He bought the Stuttgart Airport and brought 8 aircraft with him and built hangars and storage sheds, and from that time on, the airport was known as Dockery Airport. He was the first pilot to seed rice crops from the air, doing so at the Walworth Farm off Highway 130 east from Stuttgart. The USDA contracted with Dockery to help aerial spraying in the upper Midwest when farms were having difficulty getting rid of pest-eating crops. For a time, at the outbreak of World War II, Dockery helped train and check pilots flying the B-17 and B-24 bombers, and he spent some time in Florida doing this training. But the USDA persuaded him to return to the Midwest and Delta to continue help saving the nation's crops from devastation. The Stearman was a favorite of Dockery's, and at one time or another, he owned over 200 Stearmans. His grandson remembers his love of aviation.
He had an uncanny ability to approach an airplane every time to make sure that it was always safe. And he would check the vital things that you check before pre-flight. But once it started and it started moving, he was just a natural in it. He could talk and carry on with ATC. He could navigate by landmarks. It was a number of years that I was traveling with him before I actually started logging time and actually understanding that I had to take a test to become a certified pilot. What he would tell me was that flying, when you are sitting in the pilot seat, you are ultimately responsible. You're ultimately responsible for the aircraft, for articles on the ground, for personal property, and you're also responsible for your passengers first and foremost.
For a time in the 1950s, Dockery Air Service operated in 27 states, and he even did crop dusting on farms in Mexico and South America. One highlight of many came in 1948 when Dockery landed a plane on Little Rock's Broadway Bridge. He landed a Cessna 170 with a 38-foot wingspan on the old bridge that was just 42 feet wide. The plane was being brought to Robinson Auditorium for a trade expo. Orville Dockery is believed to have flown over 60,000 hours in his more than 70-year career. In 1980, Dockery and his grandson Andy Holbert became the first grandfather-grandson pair to attend a certified flight instructor seminar. And in 1984, Dockery became a member of the National Agricultural Aviation Hall of Fame based at the Mississippi Agriculture and Forestry Museum in Jackson. Jess Orville Dockery passed away in December 1997. He was 88. This innovative aviator will be long remembered for his pioneering efforts in aviation and Grand Prairie agriculture, and he has barnstormed his way into the Arkansas Aviation Hall of Fame.